thank you very kindly. I can't believe you're all still here. Don't you people have homes? Well, for our text this morning, we will talk about Proverbs 20:12. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made both of them, or made them both. You know, the Bible doesn't speak of the parathyroid or the pituitary or anything like that. But we know God made those organs too, because the Scriptures tell us that without Him, nothing was made that was made. But the Lord does not want you to be confused, for sure, on the hearing ear and the seeing eye. And if you had to pick a couple of organs to really drive home the sovereignty and majesty of our Creator, I would think these two would be as good as any. Why is it people have so much trouble in accepting this today? Many people, very intelligent people, by and large, my experience, honest people, good workers by human standards, worldly standards, very fine people, and they have trouble. In fact, for many it appears to be essentially impossible to believe that there is a creator of the ear and a creator of the eye. I think the Scriptures answer that for us because it tells us that he that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see? Think about it. That's a frightening thought. If you do not have a creator, or if you do not have a savior, can you really afford to have a creator? I think we get the idea that we can go out there and hit people over the head with a lot of scientific evidence, that we can show them how wonderfully made this or that part of the body is, or how magnificent birds are, or whatever, and I give such talks. And that by doing this, we're somehow going to browbeat or intellectualize people into becoming Christians. And I think what we often do is we scare the daylights out of them. And that's good. I consider that the law. Have you thought of this, that when we talk about the marvelous handiwork of God, we're really teaching the law? Because it's frightening. People are not that stupid, you know. They understand that if there is if an eye has been created by a creator, then that creator can see. And if an ear has been created by a creator, that creator can hear. And he can see very well and hear very well. See into our hearts and hear our inmost thoughts. And so let me submit for your consideration that people can't afford to have a creator without a savior. Maybe we get the cart before the horse sometime. Well, let's start with the hearing ear. The Lord said He made it, so you know it's going to be good, don't you? It's a wonderful thing. We start with sound. The sound of the prophets has gone out everywhere, and we have heard it. The Word of God was passed on largely by sound for many years, by the Word, spoken Word. We know that Word comes empowered with the Holy Spirit, and that Word created the heavens and earth. That's how powerful that Word is, and that Word can be heard by us with our own ears that the Lord has given us to hear, and yet those ears so often seem incapable of hearing without being energized. In fact, I would say virtually always incapable of hearing without being energized with the Holy Spirit. And what is sound when you think about it? As I speak up here, is there something traveling between me and you? Does something leave here and go out to you? Actually, nothing ever really changes place very far. You see, sound, think of this little bell in the upper right-hand corner here. The little bell rings at a certain frequency, or probably a combination of frequencies. And what is it that travels from the bell to the ear? It's compressed air and rarefied air, or dense air and less dense air, just like air pressure. Pulses of air pressure. Now, the pulses do not actually, the molecules don't move. One molecule hits the next molecule. Think of billiard balls on a table lined up in a row, almost touching one another. If you hit the first ball, it hits the next, and none of them move very far, but the last ball takes off. And that's the way the molecules of air work. It's all done with air pressure. Now, here's an interesting question. What kind of air pressure does it then take? I mean, if my voice is making little pulses of air pressure, knocking one molecule against the next, and finally knocking against your eardrum, what kind of pressure are we talking about? Well, We are talking about an ear that is sensitive to a change in pressure of 1 times 10 to the minus 10th atmospheres. Now, what does that mean? An atmosphere is basically the air pressure we have at sea level. So it's 1 times 10 to the minus 10th of the atmosphere at sea level. That much of a change in pressure is sensed by the ear as sound. Now, we know that as we go up on a mountain, air pressure gets less, right? You have trouble breathing up there. And if you go on top of Mount Evans in Colorado, 16,260 feet or so, you end up with about a half an atmosphere of pressure up there. It's quite noticeable. And, of course, if we don't go quite as high, there's less reduction in air pressure. What kind of changes is our ear able to hear? This figure doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But if you compare it to altitude, pressure changes in altitude, it's comparable to changing altitude by 1/30,000th of an inch. Now, I have a micrometer at home that measures in thousandths of an inch, and I couldn't find anything that you could see that was this thin. So I will exaggerate and get a much higher altitude for you here. A sheet of paper, many times thicker than that 30,000th of an inch. I'll place that on the floor, and I'm going to step from the floor up onto the paper. I'm not in the best physical shape. It'll take a while. And I am now stepping up to this higher altitude. You know, the air is thinner up here. Think of it. That much difference is the kind of differences in pressure we're talking about. You know we're going to be seeing a pretty incredible piece of equipment. Well, here it is. 3 basic parts to the ear. The part that's sort of done up in orange here is called the outer ear. And sound, as you know, comes into the outer ear through air, compressed and rarefied air. This sound hits the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum, and this pink part, or part that's shown in pink, is bone. So sound now switches over from being conducted through air to being conducted through bone. And then it reaches this next section, which that's the middle ear, we've just mentioned there. The next section is the inner ear, and in the inner ear, the sound is conducted through fluid. So we're going air, bone, fluid in 3 steps. Let's look at each of these sections. We'll start with the outer ear. There we'll talk about the auricle, which is the name given to the whole part of the ear you can see, sometimes called the pinna. We'll talk about the external auditory canal. That's the hole that you hear through. And we'll talk a little bit about the ceruminous glands that make earwax. And I've been threatening Ken for, I don't tell you how long, that sooner or later I was going to give a lecture on earwax. And this is it. The lecture on mucus is still in preparation. So, well, I was asked to make this lecture educational as well as boring, so let's get right into it. Here you can see that our ear is attached to our skull here on the side, and there are 3 muscles, one above, one behind, one in front, and those muscles move the ears a little bit. Some folks can move the ears better than others. I never seem to have quite mastered the art. And, of course, some animals are capable, you look at cats and what have you, of moving their ears about quite vigorously. And evolutionists, of course, have made a big deal of this. This shows that we used to take our ears and aim them all different directions. How do we explain these muscles of the ear? We're just beginning to understand how sensitive even the shape of the ear is to our perception of direction of sound and certain nuances of sound, even amplification of sound. But these ear muscles are really part of the facial muscles that you see here on the face of this individual. And most of these muscles, with just 2 exceptions, the one around the eye and the one around the mouth, the orbicularis oris in the mouth and the orbicularis oculi in the eye, those 2 are really pretty essential for what we would call normal life. If you can't close your eyelids, you go blind. You need to distribute the water over the eyes. So that'd be critical if those muscles didn't work. And if one didn't have the muscles around the mouth, You would not be able to suckle, first of all, as a child. Food, liquids would drool out of the mouth, and it would certainly be very difficult. All of the other muscles, including those associated with the ears, fall in the category of what I call nice but not necessary. You see, the Lord has given us one of those premium model bodies that have a lot of features you don't really need. Do you really need the wipers and the washers on the headlights of that Mercedes? You know, life goes on without it. I'll bet a lot of you are doing without it, aren't you? But we have a lot of really neat things. I mean, do we have to smile? We have special muscles for that pull up the corner of the mouth. If you get sad, there are those that'll droop the corner. If you'd like to grimace, we have the grimace muscles. You want to wrinkle your forehead, you can do that, but life would go on without it. Our face is alive, even out to our ears. No animal has a face like that. My wife thinks our dog has all kinds of expressions. Oh, look at Kadar, isn't he embarrassed, you know? Now, Darwin thought a lot about these facial muscles, and he had speculation for just about everything imaginable. I think my most interesting speculation for Charles Darwin was his speculation with regard to the ear, which I'll get to in a bit, in addition to the muscles. The ear is shaped like a funnel, very complicated, and it does catch the sound in a very interesting way. And back in Darwin's day, it had already been established by other scientists that the ear played an important part in the directionality of sound and perceiving its direction, and in amplifying it, actually amplifying it a considerable amount, just like an ear trumpet does. But Darwin thought that the ear was simply a vestige of our ancestors, and that we don't really need an ear anymore, never mind that a lot of reptiles don't, in fact, have an ear on the outside. But he thought it was really a vestige of our primate ancestors. And in fact, he pointed to this little bump. You see the arrow on your left here. And that's been called Darwin's tubercle, because if you feel of your ear right there, a lot of you will see that right back here, right where we're pointing, there's a little bump. Do you have that? That's your primitive ancestry. That's called Darwin's tubercle. And that relates to our ancestors whose ears flopped over. And I'd like to show you one of those at this time. There it is. That's my dog, Kadar. Do I have an hour to talk about my dog? No, stick with the talk. Okay, we'll go on with the talk. This is a wonderful dog. He's first place in the nation in obedience right now. So anyway, I can't get him to do a thing, but my wife can. Of course, she can get me to do things too, but we better get on with the talk. Now, as we come into the ear, this picture on the left is really exaggerated. That the opening is much too large. This channel, the external auditory canal, is about 1 inch deep and about 1/3 of an inch in diameter. Now, right there, the Lord knows what He's doing just right off the bat. We haven't even gotten into the interesting stuff yet, and we can see the wisdom of God. Our finger is larger than the opening into our ear. Think about it. If we could get our finger into our ear, we'd punch out our eardrum before we reach the age of 6 months. So Lord knows what size to make that opening. And indeed, the relative shape of that opening creates a resonance. If you blow across a soda bottle, you get the sound, you know, the resonance. It creates a resonance that's optimized for about 4,000 cycles per second, which is precisely where the range of human voice is. So starting right off in just nothing but a hole in the side of the head, we have some really amazing things going on here. And it's kind of moist in there, and you can't get your finger in there, and the moistness would cause the stratum corneum probably to soften up and fall off in cakes and everything, and the Lord knows about these things. And so we have some special glands in there. Also, we really don't want bugs crawling in there either, do we? And we have special glands. They're called the ceruminous glands that make earwax. They're sort of like sweat glands, only they make a really waxy substance. Here's a picture of those glands in the microscope. They have ducts that come up to the surface. And that wax makes a coating lining the internal part of the ear. It not only accumulates on the ear, it's produced only on the outer part, but some of that wax and what have you even gets further in. And any debris that comes into the ear will tend to be trapped by that wax. Also, there are hairs that are aimed outwards inside that canal that would keep bugs from coming in. And the wax is a bit noxious for most bugs, so it does tend to keep most insects out of the ear. The problem is, if you are going to have all this wax produced in your ear, and then the cells in the epidermis are growing all the time and are constantly being exfoliated, how are you going to clear your ear out if you can't get your finger in there? Well, the Lord has thought of this. This is not something that's escaped his attention. Let's just look into the external auditory canal to the eardrum. If you take a little particulate that might have gotten in the ear, and let's say you set it right on the eardrum here, and that's been done experimentally, it can be observed that those particles will flow laterally to the edge of the auditory canal, and then will move in a spiral fashion outside of the auditory canal, carrying the wax and everything with it. It's like a people mover in an airport. You know how you stand on the belt? Usually the epidermis grows the surface of the skin from the bottom up, like that, right? Comes to the top, falls off. In the ear canal, it grows sideways. And that carries the wax out of the ear. And if it doesn't do that, your ear will become completely impacted and you can't hear. How do I know that? Because I have that problem. See, since the fall, all sorts of things have gone wrong, haven't they? And one of the things that has gone wrong is that sometimes our wax remover, automated wax remover, does not work properly. The cells do not move laterally as they should or at the speed they should, and so once a year I go in, I have to have somebody else get the earwax out of my ear. But think such incredible, detailed, provident care that the Lord is even concerned about cleaning out your ears. Isn't this something else? Let's move into the middle ear now, and there we will see the tympanic membrane, the little bones of the ear, the muscles that are attached to those bones. As you know, you generally have to have muscles attached to bones, and the nerves. The middle ear is this area right here. We need this middle ear because we're going to a watery area over here. The nerves that sense the sound have to be under a fluid. They can't be out in the air. And so the sound has to go from the ear to the fluid. And have you ever tried talking to your friend underwater? Someone's underwater. I mean, my children used to be underwater about 90% of the time when we took them to the swimming pool. And you'd try to yell at them, get out of there, don't do this, you know. And this is a precious waste of the time of day trying to yell at a child underwater. Because you see, 99.9% of all of the sound passing through the air when it hits the water, there's what we call a difference in impedance there, an impedance mismatch. The traveling of sound through water is very different from air. When the sound pressure and waves hit the water, 99.9% of it reflects back at you. No wonder the kids don't pay any attention when they're underwater. You can't hear somebody speaking above the water. Do you see a problem here? We're bringing sound through air into water for all practical purposes. You need an impedance matcher that will match up the impedance between the air and the water, and that's done with the bones. So you get a little membrane like a speaker cone. Well, let's magnify that so we can see that. I call this magnifying the Lord here when I do this. We have a little speaker cone, and it is shaped like a speaker cone. It is conical, and the air comes in and hits that and causes that to wiggle. And when that wiggles, it wiggles this little bone, which is the hammer, or the malleus as it's called. This has a handle on it, as all good hammers do, that are attached to the eardrum. And when this wiggles, that causes this next bone to wiggle. If you have a hammer, you should have an anvil, shouldn't you, to hit with. So that's called the anvil, the incus. And there has to be a joint right here, and that's a little cartilaginous joint. That joint needs to be lubricated. I don't know when you've last checked the lubrication in that joint, but it does need, in fact, to be maintained and lubricated, and don't worry about it. It's all automatic. That has to be on a little axle. There are tendons you'll see in a moment, so it can wiggle, and when it wiggles, this end down here wiggles, and then that pushes on something that looks for all the world like a stirrup. On a saddle, we call it the stapes or stirrup. And the little oval base of that stirrup is like a piston. It has to have a sealed and yet movable attachment to an oval hole in bone, and it goes in and out. And there is a substantial increase in the efficiency going through this bone, such that you almost completely restore the impedance match for the fluid. Many, many times, 120 decibel increase in volume going through these bones over what you'd have if you didn't have them here. Now, reptiles just have and birds just have a single bone going across here. Instead of this step of 3, they just have one. And that bone, called the columella, works quite well. In fact, there are birds that have better hearing than we do. So it doesn't have to be tricky like this, I guess, but it is in our case. Now, let's look at a few interesting facts. We are able to hear sounds over a range of 1 million to 1. That would be like standing close to a jet aircraft, or even worse, a rock band. And comparing that to the quietest sound you're able to hear. And what kind of movement of this tympanic membrane is necessary to do this? You've already learned it takes very little difference in pressure to be perceived as sound. How is that tympanic membrane moving? Well, at 4 kilohertz, which is approximately where you're hearing my voice right now, that eardrum responds to movements of 1/10 the diameter of a hydrogen atom. Now, I know you're impressed, but you're nowhere near as impressed as you ought to be when I tell you the next thing. This eardrum is living tissue. It has blood vessels in it. Lots of blood vessels. It has nerves. You know it's sensitive to pain. And going through these blood vessels are red blood cells. 6-7 microns in diameter. It's like Rocky Mountains compared to baseballs. We have these, when we're talking 1/10 the diameter of a hydrogen atom compared to a red blood cell, I mean, we have these immense red blood cells going through the blood vessels, just kicking that membrane all over the place, while it is sensing movements due to changes in air pressure that are in the range of as little as 1/10 the diameter of a hydrogen atom. This takes some real noise filtration system. Anybody here into noise suppression and audio and what have you can really appreciate we have something going on here that is just simply profound. Now, what about those little bones that are conducting these vibrations? The littlest one, the stapes, is the smallest bone in the body. It's 3/10 of an inch long. You could take all 3 of these ear bones and put several sets on top of a dime. And it weighs 1/10,000th of an ounce. So these marvelous little bones are conducting the sound. This is the attachment of the handle of the hammer to the eardrum. And when the eardrum goes in and out, here is the little hinge that it's swinging on, the axle. That makes the other end move up here like a teeter-totter. This is a lubricated joint with cartilage in it, which then causes this to wiggle. Here is its hinge and axis here and here. And then that causes this long process on the anvil bone to move. And on the tip of that is a little knob. And now if we turn and look the other direction, in that previous picture over here, this is where that little knob, again, fits into a lubricated joint on this incredibly tiny little anvil-shaped bone. Now, these bones have muscles. What are the muscles doing? Here is the muscle called the stapedius. Comes up here, has a tendon. It attaches to the handle, where the handle is attached to the eardrum, the handle of the hammer. And over on the other side, the stapes, the stirrup, has the tiniest muscle in the body with a little tendon attached to it. What are they doing? Well, first of all, I don't think we have very much voluntary control over these muscles. They're all sort of automated. The Lord didn't leave these kinds of things up to you. We're just not up to the task. At times when we have very, very loud volumes, we need to tune down the sensitivity of this system. And when the large volumes are perceived in the brain, before you're really aware of it and can think a whole lot about it, these little muscles are already contracting to detune and dampen. Sometimes we call this muscle the tensor tympani and the stapedius, and it does just what the timpani player does in the symphony when he hits the drum and puts his hand on to arrest the head. It dampens it. Now, it can't dampen so quickly. You can't ruin your ears with a pistol fired, say, 2 inches away from your ear. But it does spare you from rock bands and other things. Okay, let's look at the development of the ear. We will think of the development of the outer ear and middle ear, and for this we'll look at a embryo, a 28-day human embryo. And I could spend an hour right here talking about this vertebral column and the so-called tail here. Evolutionists really get excited about this tail. And what's happening here is the nervous system is growing very quickly relative to the rest of the body. The heart's growing pretty fast, but the nervous system is growing quite quickly, and as a result, it folds the embryo into what we call a fetal flexure because of that rate of growth. And the vertebral column gets way out ahead of the body, at least ahead of the crown rump length here, from here to here. And it sort of looks like a tail for a while. But then the body starts growing, and it catches up. In fact, it more than catches up on us. The end of our spinal cord is about right here in the lower mid-back. So it's a kind of a progressive process. And, of course, it's not a tail, but that's another lecture. Let's look at the gill slits. How many of you have heard about gill slits? That the embryo have gills, and that's supposed to reflect our aquatic ancestry. I bring it up because, well, first of all, I can tell you two facts as a human anatomist that you can bank on. Number one, we don't have gills as an embryo. And number two, we do not have slits. And that suggests, if you think about it, that we don't have gill slits. These little folds have nothing to do with respiration whatever. Their developmental fate has nothing to do with breathing. At least not directly by any means, certainly not with regard to lung and gas exchange. There are basically 4 of them that we can see. They say there are 6 that develop, but 4 are fairly easy to see here. And in a sense, they're sort of flexure folds, because notice the embryo is curving this way, so if I put my head down, I get wrinkles in the neck, more so these days. And in addition, there are little bars of cartilage under here and other structures that help to influence this wrinkling. By the way, the ear is going to develop right up in here. The otic placode, there'll be a little vesicle or a little hole that will develop in there that will form the outer ear. And this is forming the eye here, the lens placode. Let's take a look at these arches. People love to call them the branchial arches or the branchial apparatus, and the word branchial means gill. So they're kind of slipping one by you there when they call it branchial. A much better word used in the better anatomical texts are pharyngeal. That simply means it's in the area of the pharynx, which has nothing to do with gills. So we'll call them the pharyngeal arches, the pharyngeal apparatus. And there are several of these little folds here, as you can see on the side of the embryo. And the part that sticks out down here that you could see in the previous picture, they're the pharyngeal arches. And then in between, we call that the pharyngeal clefts. And then on the inside, there's what we call a pouch. So we have 3 different things to account for: the arches, the clefts, and the pouch. And in the arches, we have cartilage. Here's the arches, clefts, pouches. And then in those arches, we have muscle, cartilage, and nerve. And they go on to make various parts of the body. Let's just take a quick peek at that. If we run on ahead and look at the adult and see what these little structures have been doing, or at least some of the things that relates to our lecture, the first and second pharyngeal arches produce the outer part of the ear that you can see. The tympanic membrane, that wonderful eardrum, is produced from the first pharyngeal pouch and the first pharyngeal cleft. And then the whole cavity that the tympanic membrane is in and the ossicles comes from the first pharyngeal cleft. Then our auditory canal comes from the pharyngeal cleft. And the eustachian tubes that balance the air on both sides of our eardrum come from the pharyngeal pouch. And by the way, you can see there are other organs here: the thyroids, the parathyroids, the cartilages of the voice box, what have you, all come from this apparatus. None of them have anything to do with respiration. So forget about gills. Let the biology books talk about that sort of thing. It's silly. If you look at the cartilages of the first pharyngeal arch, you'll notice that cartilage makes a structure called Meckel's cartilage, and evolutionists have often gotten excited about that because they believe that it was the reptile jaw that gave rise to the little bones in our mammalian ear. And here you can see the cartilage of the jaw. And indeed, in the back here, there are cartilages that will form the first 2 bones that we talked about, the hammer and the anvil, or the malleus and incus, are formed from the cartilages of that arch. Actually, the cartilage that you see down here doesn't change. Normally in our body, I should say, cartilage turns into bone, or is replaced by bone. Our whole skeleton is produced in a cartilage form in an embryo, and that's like you have in your ear. And then later on, the cartilage is broken down, becomes mineralized and dissolved, and bone takes its place. But there are two bones in the body that do not form from cartilage. One is our jawbone down here, the lower jaw, the mandible, and the other is the vault of the skull. So this little cartilage, we're not sure what it's doing. Some think Meckel's cartilage may be just giving a little shaping structure for the jaw, but it forms directly into bone. Well, here's the evolutionary story, and I'm sure you'll all be convinced because we have drawings showing the entire sequence from a primitive reptile down here, unlike living reptiles today, which are up a little higher here, from a primitive reptile up through the different reptiles, the mammal-like reptiles, right up to mammals. What has happened? The reptile jaw has several bones, whereas our jaw just has really one bone on each side. And some of these bones of the reptile jaw are said by evolutionists to have migrated up into the ear, including the hinge part of the jaw, which must have made things difficult for a while for the poor reptile. Moved up into the ear and became the little bones of the ear that we've just discussed. And here's the whole sequence, which ought to worry you a little bit because they're lined up just perfectly. When you get to the top, you can see here the little bones of the ear that have formed, and we're down to one bone in the jaw. Down here, we just have one bone in the ear and all these bones in the jaw. If you read the fine print in the article, however, you find that the first one at the bottom is a hypothetical organism. This one is a hypothetical organism. The middle ear structures, which are the most significant here that they're talking about, are also hypothetical. Well, what about the rest? They're not too bad, are they? Well, the author admits that these are not necessarily in true ancestor-descendant relationships, and that most have been unknown and undescribed structures that are reconstructed, and that the actual sizes are not uniform. So that doesn't give us much to look at, does it? Well, finally, let's go to the inner ear. The inner ear is where the ear really starts to get complicated. Up until now, we've just been kind of funning with you a little bit. Now things get really complicated. The inner ear is this part that's in blue here. And if we crank up the power, as you know, it's full of fluid. Actually, two different kinds of fluid. One is sort of like cerebrospinal fluid that we have in our brain and what have you. The blue here is a bony material. We call it the bony labyrinth because it's very complex. It's like getting into a labyrinth. And inside, rather loosely fitting, is a membranous material, sort of like balloon rubber or something. It's a membranous stuff. And it forms little loosely fitting tubes inside of these bony tubes, at the end of which there are these little balls, and then there's this big sac here. And from this we have a tube that goes out into a structure that for all the world looks like a snail. In your head right now, this whole structure is about the size of a pea. So we're talking about something fairly small. And remember the oval window we talked about where the piston of the stapes went in and out due to the sound pressure? That would be right here, the oval window. Now let's start out on the surface and look at this when it's still just covered with bone. Here's the oval window. The stapes foot plate fits in there. It's all nice and tightly sealed so nothing can escape, and yet the seal allows a movement of the piston, and that will create higher and lower pressure of the fluid inside this really complex structure. These structures over here are called the semicircular canals because they form three half circles. They're related to balance and movement. When we move our body, we can feel the direction we're moving. I'll show you how in a bit. And also we have sensory structures in here that are sensitive to the position of our body, whether we're laying down, standing up, or whether we're being pulled by gravity. Pressure that goes in here, if this is full of fluid and it's all bone, think of a soda bottle that's full of water. Can you blow air into it? You can't even get a cork into a soda bottle that's full of water, right? because you can't compress the water. If it's full of air, you can get a cork in because you can compress the air, but you can't get a cork in a bottle that's full of water. Well, that's the problem we have here. If we are to have a piston that goes in and out, we have to have some way to relieve the pressure. So it turns out there's a second porthole down here. This is the oval window. This is the round window. And when you push in here, a little membrane covering the round window pushes out. It's as if the bottom of the soda bottle full of water had a rubber bottom. So now when you put the cork in, the rubber bottom just kind of rounds out, right? Then you can put the cork in if you had a rubber piece on the bottom of the bottle. And that's what we have here. Let's just kind of saw into this a bit. This is a difficult dissection to do in the human body because even this bone is encased inside of other bone. Some of the hardest bone in the body is Petrus bone, named after Peter. Remember, Peter is like a rock. Petros really means a rock. So if we cut away all that bone, we get to here. And now if we cut away this bone, we can see the hollow spaces where the membranous labyrinth fits inside here. The oval window's up here someplace. And when the pressure comes in, the pressure distributes evenly throughout. It goes into this snail shell, around the corner, all the way up to here, where it gets into a second channel, comes all the way back down to here. And so the pressure in one causes this one to puff out a bit by following this incredible spiral course to the top and then back down another separate channel out. Let's see how well that looks in a kind of an illustration. The red would be the pressure, pulses of pressure in fluid. Remember, fluid can conduct sound too, just like air. It just has a different impedance. And it starts in the bottom down here, and it goes in and it goes round and round and round, all the way up to the top. And then when it gets to the top, it comes back through another chamber, all the way back and down. And notice the two chambers are separate in each turn. So the fluid in here has to get all the way up to the top to get in the chamber to come back out here. Let's just magnify that. Here the fluid goes through this chamber and goes all the way up to the top of the spiral. And then it comes back through this chamber. Now, why does it bother doing that? Because we have another chamber in between these two. This one is also filled with fluid, but it's a different kind of fluid. And the two do not communicate. When the pressure is increasing in this fluid, it causes an expansion which causes this little plate to move down. And when it comes back, you have a comparable effect on the bottom. And the net effect is this little triangular area is bouncing up and down. Got the picture? Now, when that hops up and down, we have a marvelous little mechanical device. Let's take a look at that on a little higher power. This plate, I have things facing just the opposite direction now. This little plate hops up and down, and when it does, there's some cells here that are in contact with a little sort of a gelatinous, like a hard jello cover. And this cover's on a hinge. Well, let's crank up the power a little bit here so you can see it. Here's the cover, and here are these cells. The cells that are important for hearing have little hairs. They're not like hairs in your head. They're like cilia in your respiratory tract. And these little cilia tuck into this gelatinous structure called the tectorial membrane. And when this thing is pushed up and down, here's the action you get. Think of your fist as being what you see in green. Think of your hand as being the tectorial membrane. You put the tectorial membrane on top of that, and as it hops up and down, there's a sliding. See if I keep my arm hinged? As I go up and down, there is a sliding on top of these hair cells. That causes the hair cells to wiggle left and right. You have 3 outer hair cells, and you have 1 inner cell. There's about 16,000 of these cells in the ear, and they each have thousands of these, or hundreds of these little hairs. And when the hairs wiggle, that's what begins to produce the electrical signal we perceive as sound. Well, we'll go from the ridiculous to the sublime here now, and look at one of these hair cells. Recent studies show that when these hair cells bend, they open ion channels that are on the top of these little hairs. And these ion channels allow ions to come in, which changes the electrical charge inside of the cell. The problem is we have to open the gate to let the ions in and then close the gate at a rate all the way up to our highest level of hearing in terms of frequency, which is about 20,000 cycles per second. So something has to open thousands and thousands, millions of these little trapdoors and close them again at the tips of all of these little hairs, and has to do so at rates up to 20,000 times a second. Now, they found that as the hairs tip, something is attached that pulls the trapdoor open, and so help me, it's a spring. It is a molecular spring. Now, let's stop right here, go to the evolutionists and say, look, never mind, we'll give you Albert Einstein's brain, anything you want, you've got it, we'll just assume evolution's done it. Would you show us how to make this molecular spring? They can open and close at 20,000 times a second on a gated ion channel to let ions in to create electrical charges that go to the brain that are interpreted as sound, that are understood as speech. It's too much for me. And then when we look in the scanning electron microscope, here are those little hairs. Here are 3 rows of the outer hair cells. Remember, there was 1 row of the inner hair cells. And the tectorial membrane has been removed. You couldn't see it. You see, we've taken that membrane off, and now we're looking at the top. And let's just crank it up and see. This is glorious. Here, these are the size of cilia, like in our respiratory tree, except they're non-movable cilia. All except one. The one out on the tip here is movable. The rest are not movable. And they all bend when this membrane brushes their tips. Let's crank it up and look at them some more. They're like organ pipes. They're all stacked up here, just perfectly in 4 rows. And there's one movable cilium up here at the tip, and the tips are all tucked into this gelatinous tectorial membrane, and when that shears, it bends these cilia. Oh my, you look at this and you just think, what else can the Lord do? Well, the other thing the Lord can do is give us a sense of balance. If you've ever lost your sense of balance, you know that this is important. And we have these little canals, and there's fluid in here. And the fluid and the canals are oriented in 3 different planes. One in this plane, one in this plane that gives us our rotational one, and one in the lateral plane. And when we move our body like this, the fluid kind of gets left behind. You see, if you had a tube with fluid in it like this, and you move the tube like that, the fluid might run down the tube this way, right? Or if you had a ball in there and you go quickly this way, the ball might roll that way. And so it's the movement of the fluid inside these little canals that are just perfectly oriented in the 3 different axes of motion of our body. It's the movement of this fluid that tells us what our direction of rotation or movement is, if it's like this, or if it's like this, or like this. And how is that sensed? Well, there's a little bulge here called the ampulla, and in the ampulla we have hair cells. And on top of the hair cells, we have something called a cupula that's like the tectorial membrane. And when the fluid pushes the cupula left and right, that wiggles the hair cells, that goes to the brain, and it's interpreted as, hey, somebody's spinning you this way. Then we have other little structures called the macula and saccula. They basically are sensing gravity, and on the top of them are little stones called otoconia. The little stones are embedded in this jelly-like substance we've been talking about. The tectorial membrane, the cupula, now we're looking at these little maculae. And these little stones have weight. And it's gravity pulling on these stones that moves the hair cells, that tells you what direction gravity's pulling you in, so you know what's up and what's down. So the figure skater, when she spins, the cupula is being pushed to one side by the inertia of the fluid in there. And when people bend over, the relative position due to the weight of these little stones causes them to know what direction is down. You know, it's interesting, some of the other creatures out there, like lobsters, you ever eat a lobster? Their ears actually go through little holes in their exoskeleton. And this little macula that has the stones in it is down inside that hole. The problem is every time the lobster sheds its skin, you know, they do that every so often to grow, they lose the little stones. And they have no sense of balance until they put new stones into this hole again. Only it doesn't happen automatically for them. They have to actually go out and find bits of sand, stick it in holes in their ear. Now, who told them to do that? They put the little bits of sand into the hole in their ear, and the gravity causes the sand to fall to the bottom of this chamber, and there are little sensory cells down there that say, okay, the stone hits, that means gravity is down this way. But you want to have some fun with a cheap experiment. Grow a crayfish or a lobster or shrimp in a tank, and when he sheds his skin, make sure there's no grit or anything in there. He isn't going to be able to find any stones. Then put some iron filings in. He'll put the iron filings in the ear, and then bring a magnet out. And he'll go upside down.